Hi, friends. Welcome back to Thrive in Aligned Healing Podcast. This is episode 165, and we are talking about negative self talk. It's like those thoughts, like some people call it intrusive thoughts. It's that like self criticism, those thoughts that, like when you do something wrong and like tells you how terrible you are, all those negative thought loops, that catastrophizing. Um, a little bit. There's a little bit of separation and catastrophizing that I'll touch on. But like this is that negative self-talk, like that just kind of seems to be present for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if negative self-talk is I think it's a result of part of our programming and part of our internalizing, of negative experiences or things, that have happened to us or things that we internalize because, of our view about ourselves in this
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but the challenge is that negative self-talk can be very detrimental. where we kind of get in our own way for fear, because a lot of times negative self-talk creates fear within us to do something, right? To go up and talk to somebody new or to like try something new. If we already have that negative self-talk and it's like your inner dialogue is
Mm-hmm.
constantly telling us that we are not good enough, that we're not um, smart enough, right? That we, whatever, aren't good looking enough to do, something that that's a huge hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, yeah, it is. What are your like what is like I've heard them like labeled as like tapes. Like there are these tapes that are playing. So what are the tapes that your brain has selected and plays?
Ooh, so
Or I did play in the past.
I was gonna say I don't have as many
Yeah.
plays nowadays as when I was younger. When I was younger, I had a lot of negative self-talk around not being smart enough.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of negative self-talk around um, not being thin enough. Those are probably my biggest two that really like hindered, me as a young adult.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Mine stuck around past like teenage years. Like mine were still around into my 30s. One of my brain's favorite tapes is "You're not capable. You don't have what it takes." Um, so self doubt for me is like one of the big ones. It doesn't come out as fear. Like I've just conditioned, like fear can sometimes be a fuel source for me. I'm like, oh, I'm afraid of this. I'm for sure doing it. But self doubt tends to be like my kryptonite.
Hmm.
Um, and then the other one is I don't belong.
Ah,
You don't belong in this room. These people are better than you. These people are smarter than you. These people are more successful than you.
yeah,
Um,
I
yeah.
get that. Um, I do get the I don't belong when I'm, especially among other professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I think a lot of people, I think, even have like a different version that's just like very critical of them, right? Um, you're not pretty enough, you're not desirable enough, you're not smart enough, you're not worthy, you're not enough, a lot of not enoughness. Um, yeah, yeah. And I think also it like goes into like maybe it's not personalized to them, but like their capabilities, like you don't make good decisions,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest troubles with negative self-talk is that what do they say? It lives in our brain rent free. But
Yeah.
first, it can often be like first thought that pops up, right? When like we might want to do something, or we're like, trying to like get excited about doing a certain thing. And if that's the first voice or the first tape that's playing, oh, yeah, that can be a challenge to be able to um recognize that it's just a tape playing, right? Like it may not be based in truth or in reality. That it's meant.
Most of the time it's not.
What's that?
Most of the time it's not based in truth or reality. Right. I'm not saying that it's not. Like you may have evidence, but again, that evidence is probably a subjective interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we think back to like how our brain's always trying to protect us, right? Yeah. How our brain's always trying to protect us and like create this sense of safety for us. And when we try to explore or do something outside of what our brain considers safe, um, and that may be, yeah, or I don't know, there may be times that even things that may be considered safe for our brain, we still have those negative tapes going in the
Oh
back.
yeah.
That really,
Yeah, like those like that self-critical one of like you didn't do this right, this isn't good enough work. That's like feeding that perfectionistic thinking.
yes.
Or a lot of like self-shaming in terms of like I procrastinated doing this, or when I don't I'm not consistent, or I don't do these things well enough, right? It's just like that's constant self-criticism.
Yeah, so I didn't really think about that. Because my self-talk has changed as I've changed and gotten older, but I do get that now, that self-criticism of like, oh, I'm not doing it well enough. Like, oh, I could do this really well, but oftentimes I don't always have the time. And I'm like, okay, I can get the information out there and I can, like it may not be perfect, but I can do it. Right. But then you still have this of, oh, it's not good enough. Yeah. I do get that. I get that now. And that creates a lot of stress for me.
Yep.
That, yeah. It creates a lot, for me, it creates a lot of overwhelm, right?
Yep.
And I don't do very well with overwhelm.
Most people don't. You're not
Yeah.
alone.
Um, so that's, yeah, I didn't recognize that as negative uh self-talk or negative chatter because it is still directed at me, but in my mind I've translated it to like what I do, right? Like my productivity, my work, like what I do. And so it doesn't feel as um painful
Yeah, yeah,
as some negative self-talk I've had before. Yeah. But it still affects my overall, yeah. Not even productivity, but it affects my overall like mindset or thought process. Right. Yeah. I guess it does keep me from doing some things.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to think about children, like, because I just love learning from them. I think that children, honestly, here's my philosophy, and people will disagree. I think that they are like the sages, the master teachers, the Yodas, right? That come to this earth to teach us, and we don't take the time to learn from them, and we spend more time trying to program them in to thinking and believing like we do, because that's feels safer and it feels like what we're supposed to do. But when we can take the time to like actually sit at their feet and like learn from them and observe them, like they are masterful teachers. My nephew is 3 years old, right? And he doesn't have the negative self-talk. And
Yeah.
he's starting to pick it up. I can definitely tell with the programming from family, right, and teachers and whatever. Like he's starting to pick it up a little bit. Like this is right or this is wrong. But
Yeah.
they just like don't have that. Like, it's not like he's potty training. And I get peed on a lot for some reason before but like diapers I never did. And now it's like, what? But like, he doesn't go into like shame cycles of like, well, yeah, like I peed and like I a little bit like dropped on my pants. Like, and he doesn't like, I'm doing this wrong. Like, I'm like, nothing. Just like, yep, like peed on pants. Like, and then we move on and we go play with tractors. Right. It's
Yeah.
like just such a good lesson of like how much we get and stay in our head and become this like critical parent of ourselves.
Yeah. That's very true. So have you heard there's a I don't even know. I think it was an article that was put out and they were looking at kids and they had tested all of these kids that were between the ages of 0 or 1 and 7.
Mhm.
Um, and they found that they estimated about 70% of them had like uh how did they describe it? Have like a genius IQ and like problem solving. Have you seen this article? It's like,
No.
yeah, I'll have to go back and find it. But it from one, I want to say 1 to 5, but I feel like maybe it was 1 to 7. Um, the 70% of these kids that were evaluated had a genius, they labeled them as like genius mindset. And then the same kids, when they were like 9 and 10, they tested them again, and they had been in school a little bit longer, and so those numbers started to drop, right, from like 70% to 30%. And then they estimated after 10 years old and the kids have been in school for a while, that was down to like 3%. Yeah. And that was around our education system and how kids are kind of programmed and raised. So I could totally see that when you spend time with kids, they don't have that. It's just their brain like in the raw, right? It's
Yeah.
like how our brain was developed and how our brain works without like the filters, without this programming of what our shoulds are, right? Or even technically what's right and wrong. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. I know a lot of people will like look at that study and be like, oh, well, it just got harder academically, right? And that's like absolutely not true. I don't think. I think what's happening is you see the effect of like programming and like right and wrong and like shoulds and coulds and like needs, right? And like that erodes their self-confidence, right? Like, and that eroding of the self-confidence then elevates the self-protection mechanisms that box us in.
Right. Yeah. It starts to put up these walls, right? That we think are normal to um interact within. Yeah.
Mhm.
But as kids, you don't have those walls, right? Like we're learning them as we get older, as we recognize, what is it like to be a human being in this world, right? What is it like to be a human being within my family, within my community? And that's where, yeah, we learn that programming or those um uh boundaries get, yeah, kind of
Mhm.
placed on us as kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think then we adapt that. We adopt that. Yeah. And as we grow older, right, we adopt those boundaries and those limitations, if you will. Yeah, we internalize them and create this
It's like
negative
we create our own prison for ourselves,
view. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which limits our potential, it limits our intelligence, it limits our ability, it limits our risk tolerance. It limits our self-confidence,
Mm-hmm.
our rejection resilience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that, I mean, when we break that uh ceiling that has been programmed, right? We break those limitations and recognize that where that negative self-talk comes from, right? And recognizing that it it's not real, right? Like it but if it's the tape that we play all the time over and over, and like anytime we have a new situation or new instance, it's hard not to believe that it's not true.
Yeah, and I and I think that's where like the reticular activating system concept was so freeing for me, right? Because my brain is so data driven, right? Like it's always searching like where are the facts, where are the facts, where were the facts, right? Um and so if I didn't have that concept, then it's like all my brain has is evidence from the past.
Yeah.
But here's the deal, that before the RAS concept, like I all I had to believe was historical past evidence, right? And now I understand, like, okay, you have a belief, and then like the car, I use the car, you know this, right? You have a belief, like I decide I want a red car, and then all I start seeing is red cars everywhere.
Yeah.
That's my RAS, right? Like my reticular activating system, like, oh, this is now pertinent information to us. Okay, I will let that into your awareness now. And now you become aware of all these cars. Those cars were always there.
Yeah.
My brain didn't allow the awareness to them. So when I can take that concept and apply it to historical evidence, past beliefs, it's like, oh, all that evidence that I have for these things is highly skewed because my RAS was only looking for evidence to validate those beliefs.
Yeah.
I wasn't seeing the whole picture the whole time. So all this evidence from history, from my past,
Yeah.
is truly subjective interpretation. So now I get to make a different decision, like, do I believe this evidence that has essentially been tampered with?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, every time you pull up a memory, you know this, but every time you pull up a memory, it is like a Word document. You will alter that memory for where you're at in this place, in this world, in this situation, just a little bit. Then you'll resave it back in there. So again, it's evidence that's been tampered with.
Yeah.
So it's just not reliable sources.
Yeah. Um, Very true. I like when we create a space in which people can see that um perspective, right? Or they can see that, oh, I can retrain my brain to look for different evidence, right? Like I can create a different filter within that reticular activating system to now find, yeah, or look for, right? Or yeah, bring to your awareness evidence that's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it might be more true, and be rooted in uh a different space, right? Like a different place instead of this like unworthiness and not enoughness, um to help us to break those limitations that we've created.
Yeah, like one of my, like I told you guys earlier, like one of my negative self-talk is like, you're not capable.
Mhm.
When I went and I looked back on the history and the evidence for that, and I really like drilled down into like, where did this come from? And I thought about it. And I found like my parents never told me like, you can't do stuff, you're not capable. That was never messaging from my parents ever, right? They might have not been like externally verbally like affirming like you can, but there was never from them like, you can't do things. And so then I like dug a little deeper, like, where did this come from? And it was like, it was little Kim, probably somewhere in the range of like, I don't know, 4 to 8, probably, who in her family system, because I am the oldest, was like, I need to make them happy, right? I need to make my parents happy. I need to make my parents proud of me. Okay. And my parents aren't external verbally, like, we're proud of you type people. Okay. So what happened is Kim couldn't make them happy. She couldn't make them like tell her that they were proud of her. She was right. So how she interpreted that was, I'm not capable of making them happy. I'm not capable of making them proud of me, right? And then Haraz went and found evidence to show like, you aren't capable. And so it just became blanketed over everything, right? And when I look at that from a coach's mindset, like, oh, I was never going to be capable, because happiness is an inside job. Right. Happiness is created by the human. It's an emotion that they create through their mindset. No one can create happiness for another human, right? So me or any other human was never going to be capable of that. Yeah. But yet little Kim interpreted it and took it personally and was like, well, I'm not capable. And then she spent her life like, Haraz was looking for evidence to validate, like, see, you're not capable. See, you're not capable. Right. Yeah. And it totally disregarded all the evidence that I was capable. And when I saw that story, and I was like, oh shit, like that was totally based on like no factual evidence. No. But has ran and controlled my life for 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's exciting when we slow down and start to recognize where our thoughts come from. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because that's huge to be able to look back and recognize, like, and put those pieces of that puzzle together. Like, okay, this is where I'm starting. This is the, tape that plays in my head. Where does that come from? Right? That's not something that just comes out of thin air. It came out of experience, right? As your 6-year-old self. Mm-hmm. And the situations have drastically changed since we were 6 years old.
Right.
Yeah, the world has, we've changed within the world around us. Yeah, so our role within the world has changed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yet we're still, those experiences are, so, what's the word? Not underlined, but ingrained.
Yeah.
In us at a young age, because that's part of our development, that I feel like it's very empowering when we go back, and start to recognize, oh, I can choose to stay on that, thinking, stay with that thinking, stay with that filter in our RAS, right? Constantly looking for that evidence, or I can switch that.
It's not based on facts.
I was just going to say it's not a fact.
So it's like, do I choose to continue to believe a lie, or do I choose to pivot and like start building this on some facts and reality?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that we will find ourselves in a much more empowered state when we start, believing and repeating that evidence of facts in our mind.
Yeah. I think one thing too, like with the negative self-talk, like the awareness, seeing that like it's not, it's built on tampered evidence that is not, like that is it's some subjective interpretation of your reality that your RAS now has found evidence for, right? So seeing that it's a story, is very helpful. But then two, I think what has also been really helpful for me, because that takes my power back, but what's been helpful for me too is not arguing with my brain.
Mm.
Right? Like, not like, no, that's not true. You are capable. Because my brain is just going to double down then. Because resistance causes things to persist. So it's like curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, this is what we're choosing to believe. Like, this is where we're going. Okay, great, brain. You provide me factual evidence that this is true. And I'm happy to go along with you.
Yeah.
You can't provide that. Then what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, what are we doing with this? Like, what are you actually needing? Because I like to think of our brain as like, as that like 6-year-old self, right? That's just like, it's wired to like just survive. Let's survive. And everything is a threat to us.
Yeah.
Everything is a threat. And let's just survive. And it's like, okay, I, as the adult, it's my responsibility to parent you in a loving, nurturing, I see you, I hear you, you're valid in your fears, but not everything is a boogeyman.
Right. Right.
So I think like not arguing with our brain and like getting curious. And then the other part that's been helpful to get rid of negative self-talk for me is really like addressing the neurochemicals and the hormone perspective
Mm-hmm.
to set my brain up in a more positive, balanced environment, right? Like addressing the serotonin levels, addressing the dopamine levels, pushing them into getting my body to like rebalance into that. I call it the Goldilocks syndrome, like that just right space, right? Because we've talked about like when it's too much serotonin, we create an anxiety state in our body. When it's too little serotonin, there's an anxiety state in my body. It's hard then to access clear, focus-based thinking when our neurochemicals aren't balanced.
That's true. Just how we've talked about how complex human beings are, right? And the complexity of our brain, is that it's always like our reticular activating system, right? It's always feeding or filtering out information with from our surroundings, and from our thoughts. But if our neurotransmitters are out of balance, whether that is creating that imbalance in thinking, or if the thinking is creating the imbalance in the neurotransmitters, it is essential to be able to find that balance and recognize, where our levels are, and chemically or biochemically, how is that influencing, our thought processes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think that is essential in understanding that relationship, and beginning to take action to balance them out, or at least to recognize, right, where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of to recap for you guys, it's awareness, like that these this negative self-chatter is probably rooted in stories,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then to not argue with it, like it's our responsibility as adult to help self-soothe our brain and give it the space it needs to be heard and seen. And then really to like start exploring rebalancing your neurochemicals and your hormones so you can have a much clearer thinking brain. You can have a brain that, and a nervous system, right? A nervous system that is more regulated and is not constantly chronically living in fight or flight. Because if you're living in fight or flight in your nervous system, you're forcing your brain into a fight or flight chemical profile, which is going to influence the quality of thoughts that you have.
Very true. Yep. Directly influence them.
Yeah. 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 So I hope that helps.
I think it does. Well, it helps to kind of like, lay that groundwork, right? And that outline of where those thoughts come from, what we can start to do to address them. Yeah. And to change them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Carmen.
Thank you.